So I just want to say a great big welcome to everyone here today. Today we're going to be talking about raising resilient parents, which I tell you, I need a little bit of that myself too. And today we're going to be talking about how we can best support our children, how we can help them in all different ways, from the education portion to emotional development as well as financial. So there's a lot that we're going to be doing today, and I have two fantastic, wonderful colleagues here today, Jeff and Sharon, and I'll bring it over to you to kick us off and tell us a little bit more about this wonderful webinar that we're doing.
Well, thank you so much, Stacy, first of all, for agreeing to do this webinar. As you and I spoke in the past about what it is we would like to provide parents with, we both saw that education is certainly one of the top priorities of every parent, and certainly consumes a great deal of time in terms of thinking through best choices for their respective children. So I am honored to be with both you, Stacey Francis from Francis Financial, a wonderful resource for parents and independent professionals who are seeking guidance on how to best manage finances and gain financial literacy, as well as my colleague, Jeff Dorvac, whom I've interacted with for many years now, who I think is a very well-balanced college advisor, somebody who really can look at students as a whole being and consider top choices that really reflect what strengths are for them. So one of the main ideas in talking to parents about resiliency is that, of course, we hear so much about grit and so much about what we want our children to be able to, how many challenges we want our children to be able to face in the course of their lives, in the course of their studies, and be able to do it well and be able to manage stress and perform at the highest level that they can. And, you know, in thinking through so many of these talks about children, we sometimes forget to talk to adults about themselves and about what it is that they have at their disposal in terms of resources so that they can be resilient in raising their children. There's so much energy that goes into raising children, but sometimes we forget that we also have to put some of that energy into raising ourselves in a way as grown-ups. You know, one of the very interesting aspects I find about nature is that we start off being parents of infants, of newborns. And I think nature is quite brilliant because at that stage, we have to put so much energy into just the survival of a newborn who cries, needs to sleep, needs to eat, and then needs to sleep again, and cries again, and needs to eat again. And from there, we have this little being that's completely dependent on us to a being that really develops some independent skills over time, or that's the goal. And I think that just as parents are parents of newborns or infants, they should think about themselves in that vein as well, in terms of their stages of parenting. That when you have really young kids, you know, you are an infant parent yourself, and that as your children grow, you're also growing with them in what you're developing, the tools you're developing to be able to make choices at times on behalf of your children. There's no doubt that in the New York City landscape, I think education takes on a whole other level of thought for parents in terms of how they're raising their kids. Just today, Stacey and Jeff, interestingly enough, I was with a friend of mine, and she was talking about how life in Seattle was just so different. You know, she knew exactly what would happen if she were in Seattle for her children. They would be going to that elementary school and then progressing to that middle school, and following that, it would be the high school. That, you know, was a sequence to the educational trajectory, and not so as we know in New York. In New York, I feel like it is a culture of there's always better around the corner, and whether a parent has worked very hard to get their kindergarten student into what they perceive as the top opportunity in the city, you'd be amazed by how many people walk into my door as time progresses, and they're wondering, is this really the best choice for my child? And partly, it is a culture of talking a lot to each other, living in very close quarters, having a highly competitive population that is constantly assessing what the choices are, which in one respect is great. In another respect, it can be a challenge because, certainly the more choices we have, the more decisions often we have to make about what those choices are. And the thing is, children aren't static. So the child that we see at 5 years of age may not be the child we see at 9 years of age, and that 9-year-old child may not be the child we see at 13 years of age. So being fluid with that is a big part of being resilient. Um, really understanding that we can only make the best choices for our children at that point in time with the information that we have on hand to make that decision, and also with the resources that we have. And I give about 10 talks per year to parent populations coming from all areas of the city. I think parents by and large are really wanting to do it right the first time around and can really beat themselves up when they feel they aren't doing it right, or they feel that something isn't going in the right course for their child. And I think in the same way that the resources can be so plentiful, they can be overwhelming. Sort of how do you sift through all of these resources and really know how to go to the professional that is the right for you? Sometimes they're wonderful professionals, but you also have to find that fit of the professional that really works for you. And I think that that's another challenge, another layer of challenge that some parents have. So in thinking about resiliency in parents, the way I define resiliency again is really about being able to look at a situation, look at the resources and the options available, talk to enough people, and by that I really mean enough people, not everybody that you encounter out on this, but enough people, to then be able to say, okay, here's my timeline. The timeline is tomorrow at 5 p.m. Me and my partner, or me if I'm a single parent, I'm going to sit down and make that decision based on the information that I have and move forward with it. And that to me is really what resiliency is about. When you're faced with certain challenges or faced with certain problems, you're able to bring in what that problem is, look at the resources around you, tap into those resources, and give yourself a deadline for when you're going to make a decision. Make the decision and know that that decision was made in the best possible way at that point in time, which means that 6 months later, a year later, you could be looking at that decision and saying, now I have different information. What else do I want to go find out about? How else do I want to proceed here? And go from there. And I think a lot of the struggles happen when there's that difficulty in making the decision. And so it's about bouncing around from professional to professional to professional, to different people to ask for different advice. And there's no deadline. There's no sort of timeline for when am I going to make this decision? And do I have enough information here to make this decision? And there's always an opportunity to get more and more information, but I think we can all agree that there comes a point where it's just enough. And for each person, they know how much enough is. So I can't really quantify it. That at a certain point, you have to be able to say, I have enough information at my disposal. It's time for me to bring it in, look at it, make a decision, move on it, knowing that down the line I may be making a different decision, or I may be coming back to the table to reassess this. But really, our research on grit shows us that it's not about doing everything perfectly, but it's about doing things with enough of the stamina for following through on what it is that we want to accomplish. So that is really what's much more interesting about life and grit than getting it right or perfect every time. It's much more interesting to show up and be part of something than to sit and overanalyze and live in our heads and never move forward with plans in life. So when we're thinking about grit, as adults towards our children, we have to think that, it doesn't mean that we're always going to make perfect choices for our children, that we're always going to say the perfect things for our children. In fact, children actually don't expect that. What children do expect is that as they keep pushing boundaries, which is what they're designed to do, they're designed to see how far can I take you. And the adult job is to give it structure and a frame and to recognize that sometimes no is a complete sentence. It doesn't mean no, but let me explain and explain and explain. It means, I hear what you're saying, but no, this is our decision. And sometimes that has to be good enough. I think for children not to have boundaries, not to know what the consequences are, not to get clarity surrounding expectations that are within their reach is actually quite scary for them. And it becomes scary for adults too if they can't get to that point of saying no, framing things for children, framing things as their children grow into adolescent years. Because as I said, children's job is to really look at how far they can go. That's their striving for independence in their world. And the adult job is to frame that so that there are times when, yes, the independence is necessary. Yes, it's important as a 5-year-old learns how to put on their own clothes and get ready for school as they step into their kindergarten years. It's equally important for adults to recognize when it is that they need to step in and say, okay, this now belongs in my court. I have to help you make these decisions, or sometimes I have to make these decisions on your behalf. It makes everybody saner and also feel more confident in what it is that they're trying to accomplish. One of the things that I see in my work with children and adolescents is that the boundary setting and the saying no in a world that has really flooded us with so many choices becomes that much more challenging, particularly because now children and adolescents have access to social media and they're often accessing things that adults don't know about. So there's this extra layer of exposure that sometimes adults really don't feel they have access to, or find out later that the child was having access to things that they perhaps shouldn't have. So I think that there is, this piece about saying no and boundary setting is yet another layer of challenge in it, in the sense that children are being exposed to a lot of things. Children are also having their peer groups expose them to many things. And for adults, sometimes to look at children within a certain context and say, should I be giving my 9-year-old that latest and greatest Apple iPhone that they absolutely say they must have because their friend has it? Should I be allowing my child to leave the door with, the request of $50 to go to this particular event, or $100 or $200, or I've even known teens who've had $500 cash walking around the city. So, whatever it may be, I think that we have to be really mindful that the material goods have their place as well. There has to be a boundary for the material goods for children as well. They learn how to manage the material goods through how we teach them how to manage the material goods. And, in response to children saying, well, Susie's doing it and John's doing it and so is getting this and getting that, why am I not getting this and getting that? I think that there has to be a real conversation in each household about what the values are. And if the values are not similar, it's okay to say to children, well, this is our family. This is how we do it. And to really create an opportunity for education. And I think that resiliency comes for adults through the practice of putting some of those boundaries, putting some of those contexts, making certain decisions about, what it is that we value as parents in our parenting, and how do we express that and relay that to our children as life circumstances come up, because we all learn best when we're learning from natural consequences. In other words, something has happened. We didn't follow through with that assignment. We didn't get to school on time. We didn't hand in that assignment. The result of that was getting a grade that perhaps the child didn't desire, didn't want. And that's a natural consequence. There's an opportunity to learn there. So every time that we as adults in our parenting try to intervene in a natural consequence, we're in essence robbing a child from the opportunity to learn and be resilient. And we're kind of robbing ourselves too from the opportunity to create that resiliency in saying no and setting the boundary and surviving the anger that comes about, and then seeing that things really do blow over, that people really do forgive and move on, and life goes on. So one of the ideas in this talk was to also be able to hear from you, Jeff, and you, Stacy, in your respective work, what it is that you would really highlight for parents in, the different aspects of parenting and in different aspects of grown-up life. And Jeff, I know that you have done a lot of work on the college process with parents and with teens. One of the pieces that I've admired about your work is that you do not create hysteria surrounding this process. And I think that the process in and of itself can be very grueling. It can obviously, it's very time consuming, but it can also bring a lot of household stress. And I think that your message, from what I've heard in public speaking talks that you have done, is really counter to that. You really don't create that climate of, you should really start when you're in kindergarten, and here are the various services that you should be enlisting in. Because I think that there is also a monetary component to what has happened to education, some of which benefits children and adolescents, and some of which really doesn't. So I would love for us to now be able to hear a bit from you, Jeff, about what it is that you advise parents in this process and how it is that they can, be resilient in it for their children.
Sure. All right. Thanks, Sharon. Sure. I think in this day and age, we all seem to think that the college process, the application process, the selection process has become, so much more difficult than it was, 20, 30 years ago. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think that the pressure, the intensity of it has ratcheted up, but in a lot of ways, due to things like the Common Application and obviously the internet, and all the test prep that's available, here in the city, or in person, or on resources on the internet, have made things actually a lot easier to apply to college, and even find out information about particular colleges. But what I think has happened is magazines and newspapers, for example, U.S. News and World Report, ranking colleges, based on, whatever criteria they think is, most important, have put a lot of, pressure on the whole process of getting into the right school, the best school. But as we know, getting into the best school, quote unquote, doesn't always translate to success. And also not every kid is, cut out for that particular college environment. And, that's one of the things I think very strongly and feel very strongly about is it's more important to find the right fit. So to backtrack a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about just how to start exploring this whole experience, when might be a good time to start. I worked for many years as a college counselor in the San Francisco School District, and I worked with a lot of first-generation kids that were immigrant families, and many of them have not been to college in the United States. So the idea that we did in what we did, the Gear Up program, which is a federally funded program, large federal grant, was to start early. We got kids on college campuses. We gave them basic information as early as 7th and 8th grade. The theory was, and the idea was just to let them know that college is out there and college is cool. It wasn't so much about how much it costs. It wasn't so much about what kind of grades you need to get into Stanford or Berkeley. It was more about, this is out here for you. It's a place that you might want to be, and just starting that kind of awareness process. I think that's fine. I think that basic awareness from an early age, from 7th, 8th, 9th grade, is appropriate. Grooming, I don't think that's necessarily the right thing to do, because we want to see what things kids naturally gravitate towards. It's kind of like activities or sports, right? If you force a kid to do baseball that really hates baseball, it's probably not going to be very successful. If they like Taekwondo, we'll let them do Taekwondo. It's a little bit like the education experience. Obviously, the most important thing a student can do early on, especially from 9th grade on, is get good grades. Get settled into school, get excited about school, not turned off to the learning environment, but, get excited and want to do well for themselves, right, without the added pressure that family might put on, or peers might put on, or the school might put on, to the point where children are getting sick. That's not, ideal for family, for kids especially. We work with a lot of kids that, have anxiety that develops into depression and so on. And then, not only are they not going to college, but then they're going to be going into treatment. And, that's a whole nother world that, I don't wish on anybody. So, taking this experience and, making it comfortable and letting the student kind of gravitate towards where they best belong. Right, all those things that I mentioned are important as far as grades, getting involved in things at school, and then doing some, college exploration. I really don't recommend you really get into the meat of visiting colleges, starting the ACT, SAT prep stuff until about, fall of 11th grade. Fall of 11th grade is also very important as far as grades go. Colleges really like to see, a strong first semester and obviously second semester. But, if you can pepper in some test prep there, getting them ready for, I would say, a first ACT or SAT test, say in the winter time of their junior year, that's a good time to do that. And then maybe even starting to do some college visits in, the winter, spring of their 11th grade year. Coming up with a college list is important, but part of that is, getting them on some college campuses and seeing what works best for them. I think it's really important, to find the right environment. Getting them exposed to college campuses and taking visits. You don't necessarily have to go to like every college that they want to apply to. But I think it's good to go see types of colleges. It's good to see, a large state school. It's good to see a small liberal arts private school, maybe a medium-sized, say, Catholic school. So, if they work with somebody or a college counselor or independent college counselor, they have some perspective when you say, hey, what does SUNY Binghamton look like? Or what does, Haverford look like? At least they have some perspective of kind of seeing these different types of colleges. And then obviously it's really important to, kind of see where they feel like they fit in. I really feel strongly about the, the social environment for students there. What kind of kids go there? Do they fit in with that type of kid? Is it an artsy school? Is it a more jockey school? Is it a really academically rigorous school? Are they going to be comfortable there? And then also, location. Do they want to be in a city? Do they want to be in a suburban area? Or is a college campus important to them, or can they be in a school like NYU that really doesn't have a college campus? Weather, right? Are they okay with winter? Going to school in Maine, winter starts in October, and some years it doesn't finish till May. Is that a place where they want to be, or would they rather be in sunny Southern California? These are all important considerations. I feel a lot of families make the mistake of saying, well, it's the best school that they got into, and that's why they're going to go. I often, question that. The best school, what does that mean? According to who? I often think that, sure, does Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, does that look good on a resume? Sure, it does. But beyond that, I really question what anybody knows the difference between Colby College or Swarthmore or Pomona or Skidmore, so on and so forth. You might have some people that have some understanding of that, but, oftentimes, not everybody's going to really know the breadth and depth of what that school experience was for you. I have plenty of students and friends of mine that have gone to Ivy League schools and skated through their education there. Where I know plenty of students that went to University of say Massachusetts and worked really hard to get a really good education. So I
stop you for a minute because I think you're
sure.
something I want to make sure we don't gloss over it.
Sure.
You brought up the idea of school fit a couple of times, and I think that is something certainly in my work as an educational consultant, looking at students starting in kindergarten and beyond, that I think about a great deal. And it really comes from my own personal story in a way, this level of understanding how important fit is. I was raised to do everything in a very, very tight and narrow sort of way. I went to one of the most renowned schools in Brazil, St. Paul's. I then went to Princeton Day School. I then went to Georgetown, and so on and so forth. And I think, for me, the places that I thrived in were the places that were a fit for me. The places that I really did not thrive in were not a fit. And I saw that in my career, starting out in child developmental psychology and then moving into general and special education. I clearly see 18 years in of working with kids and teens that a lot of the issues that are coming up for them have to do with the environmental misfit and the struggle that it is for us to look at that environment and say, okay, we have to consider this person, we have to consider their abilities, we have to consider their strengths and their relative weaknesses. We all have them. And we have to consider over time, how is it that we place them in situations where they're working on their weaknesses, but at the same time, they're able to play to their strengths, where they're able to
Sure.
tap into their strengths, to give them fuel, to then work through the areas that are really difficult for them. And often what we're doing is that we take kids who really are falling short in some areas. We then, tap onto their areas of weakness as that kind of lone clanging on the piano of that one key all day long. And it's like, oh, your strength doesn't math and sciences. Now you're going to have 10, 15 hours of tutoring in math and sciences because you're in an accelerated curriculum that you do not need to be in math and sciences, but that's really important for your college transcript, right? And some of the fallout of that is the burnout in the sense of, I'm 15, I hate my life. I go to school as a job, and what is the point? What is the point of doing this? And so what we're seeing as a fallout is really something that is completely created in the environment. In other words, it's not necessarily that these kids would naturally have the depression and the anxiety, but that tapping on that key, that weak key all day long, is what causes them to start thinking, I am not good enough, I am not going to excel, I am not going to get into the college that I'm expected to get into. And I am not at all, by the way, opposed to academic rigor. I think that there are things that honestly, I'm like, I am going to push you to the max. I know you can do this. I know you can get through this assignment, and this is how we're going to figure it out. We're going to come together and sort this out and make an agreement because I know this is a goal for you too. But not enlisting teams in the goals we have for them, in my opinion, is a huge mistake, right? And so going back to you and what you're saying about fit, enlisting these teams in conversations about their lives and what it is they actually want to do with their lives, as opposed to these projections of what they must do in their lives to succeed, when honestly, it's not even the truth, right? There are plenty of people who've gone about very successful paths, getting degrees from a variety of institutions. And it doesn't make one institution not greater than another. There are certainly institutions we can objectively say they're greater than another, right? But not paying mind to who is it you have in front of you when you're talking about what the goals are, and then not enlisting them in the goal setting. This is just what you're doing. It can't be a recipe for success. So I'm going to turn this back to you, Jeff.
Right, I agree, and which leads me to, having them, pave their own path and do the work, towards their goals. If it's not their goals, they're going to be not so motivated to, do the schoolwork or, do the application. I think it's very important for the students to own the experience and own the process. When parents get too involved and they, smother the student with, tutors and extra help and more time on tests and, everything they think that's going to, create advantage, it might be an advantage to get their grades up, but it also can create a disadvantage because the student's not generally prepared or, realistically prepared to be an independent learner in college. And I see this all too often. So I think the more the student has the ownership and does the work as far as, scheduling visits for college tours, scheduling the interviews, filling out the application, doing the essay. I think that is really essential. It's okay to nudge, but, if you're pushing them to do things that they either don't want to do or they're not yet ready to do, it's going to backfire. I often use the college application process as a real meter of whether or not they're ready for the basics of college. If they're able to do this college application process with some help and some guidance, but mostly do it on their own and really take the initiative, I generally feel like, okay, that's a really good step that shows the maturity, the awareness, and the willingness, to be able to function in most academic environments, in a freshman year. But if it's like pulling teeth and they can't do the basics, the logistics, the organization, getting started on their essay, it's only a 650-word essay. If they're not yet ready to write that, it's showing me that they might not be ready for, that first-year college experience, and they either might need some remediation, or they might need a gap year, or or another plan. So I do think it's important to let them do as much as possible. And so again, it goes back to, if you kind of start this process, early on, but kind of empower them to lead this, steer the bus, then they have the the impetus to want to do it, and I think that's important. So as we
Jeff,
talked about,
I just want to ask a quick question too. I just got a question from one of our listeners as well, and just before you move to the the next piece, you talked a little bit about test taking, and you were just talking about tutors, and so there are a good number of individuals who can afford a ACT or SAT tutor once a week, even more than once a week, but then other classmates can't necessarily afford test prep at all. What are your thoughts about how to help those kids who can't necessarily afford that necessarily, especially if they're not great test takers? Because there are some parents out there that just know, unfortunately, their kids may be brilliant in the classroom, brilliant on longer-term assignments, but when it comes to the test piece.
Taking the test, sure.
Yeah.
Well,
which,
let me
you say test and anxiety comes in my mind already. So.
Yes, it can. Well, so I work with a real range of populations, and I do a lot of work with kids that have, a variety of learning disabilities, some significant, some not so significant, but nevertheless often have a hard time taking tests. I also work with families that, can't spend $275 an hour on 4 hours a week of test prep for 8 months. I read applications for UC Berkeley. I've done so for 7 years, and one of the things that I've learned from my experience with UC Berkeley, and not all colleges do this, but I do think a lot of them do, is we look at them from a holistic point of view. We do a holistic review, is what we call it. So we're looking at all the pictures, all the pieces of the picture here. We're looking at the students' grades, their activities, their test scores. We're looking at their letters of recommendation. everything that they supply us, but we're also looking at their background. Kids that we know, and you can, there's some identifiers out there of what the family's income is and where that they come from. We know that a student that might not have the affluence to have all the test prep that they would like might not score as well on a test than somebody that does. And we definitely take that into account. I would definitely say the test is not the end-all, be-all. It is one factor. In saying that, right, a good test score, it helps. There's no doubt about it. So what can you do?
Can I also lend an idea about the test prep question, if I may? I think that, there are a couple of things. One of which is there's so much online now, Stacy.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Yeah.
To say a person has no access to test prep, even for free, is not true. So there are a lot of materials, including Khan Academy, that really has put a lot of effort into trying to level the playing field of this inequity gap by offering a lot of prep online. I mean, they can you can literally do like a self-guided test prep where as you're answering questions incorrectly, they're giving you different assignments to do and walking you through step by step. So, I think sometimes parents who are paying $275 an hour, or even another day I heard there's somebody who charges $1,000 an hour for test prep, they may or may not be getting what that money is going for, first of all. And secondly, the fact of the matter is that kids need to be doing well their junior year. So Jess, your point about, your junior year, your junior year is really the right year to start taking these tests, also means that you need to have ample time to be doing other things in your life other than test prep, so that you're doing well on the classes that you can do well in. You're taking the hardest classes that you can take that play to your strengths. And you're developing a narrative about yourself that makes sense, right? That it's not just, this is me, I'm this tiny little narrow person, and here's this tiny metric that shows me, right? You're really building a story about yourself starting your freshman year. So we happen to do test prep for our students. Sometimes parents walk in and they expect us to say, you should be doing, 20 hours a week. We do as young as IC prep for kids going into ongoing private schools, or SSAT prep as well, to SAT, ACT prep. So we do all kinds of test prep. And, truly the quality of test prep goes a long way versus the quantity. So it's not only
I agree.
a kid needs to be doing 20 hours of test prep a week, paid, paying a private tutor. You could have an excellent instruction a couple of times a week and be well set up to be doing work on your own. And in fact, back to your point, Jeff, if a student is showing that they can't do any independent work and they're a junior, or and then a senior, obviously, that's hugely concerning, right? When a parent comes in the door and says, well, my child just won't do any of this work if I don't have all these hours of tutoring, we have to look at that and say, what's going on there? Let's put some resources into figuring out why the independent work isn't happening, right? And then enabling the kid to really reach the level of independence, which is the goal. The goal, you can't send somebody in to take the test on behalf of the student. So there's only so much that test prep is really going to get a student to. And being able to figure out, we're going to put the resources into the test prep, and then we have to distribute our resources, is important to do, because it's also it can be a very noisy process in terms of what parents are saying to each other. And I absolutely think that, for a student who is able to do some independent work, 3 hours a week could be ample time on test prep, literally. And if there are other issues going on for a student where they really, really do terribly on tests, and it's also looking at, how do I allocate my resources so that, we're looking at schools that aren't putting as much weight on these standardized tests, right? Rather than, creating goals and expectations where the child is likely to fail. which I think
Right. There's a growing list of test optional schools, or like you said, schools that don't overemphasize the test. So
right.
there's a lot of different options.
Right. So really, for the parent who is talking about the resources towards test prep, I know that hits parents really at their core, right? The sense of, I'm supposed to be helping my child prepare in the best possible way, and I feel inadequate because I can't afford this tutoring. Well, what I have to tell you is that it's okay if you can't afford this tutoring. There are resources online, Khan Academy being one of them. There's peer tutoring that is a lot less costly. There
Often the local library, summertime test
right.
prep.
And frankly, there's really nobody out there saying, I'm taking the metrics on what the best test prep actually is. So, when you're looking at data, you can't necessarily say, oh, this company is showing this data and this data is absolutely valid and reliable, because you don't know where these students are coming in from, right? Or what this set of circumstances for them are. So I appreciate that it can feel terrible for a parent if they feel like, they're not giving their child something, but really there are plenty of things to give that don't cost a lot or don't cost anything at all.
Yep, good point. Okay, well I think I took most of my time, so why don't I pass it over to Stacy?
So Stacy, yes, thank you so much for bringing in this really important aspect to our conversation about resiliency and parenting, and particularly when it comes to parenting and money, because that is such a loaded issue, right? And when we're talking about the cost of parenting kids, and also, where to set some boundaries with our kids when it comes to paying for things. So we really appreciate your insights as a financial advisor.
Yeah, I liken kids going off to college and dealing with their money similar to if you went on a JetBlue flight and the pilot grabbed you on the way in as you were going past the cockpit door saying, I'm actually not feeling well, would you mind taking over and flying to LA for me? Of course, anyone in the world would look at them with two heads and say, I have no flight training. Why are you asking me to do this? Well, that's actually what we're asking a lot of our kids to do when we send them off to college and expect them to manage a budget, deal, properly with credit cards, and make good decisions. So just as with flight school, you don't go to flight school in a day and come out a wonderful, well-equipped, safe pilot, it's the same thing actually with your finances. So starting to talk about finances, there's never too early of an age. And kids really want to talk about money. They want to learn about money. But unfortunately, there is definitely an issue for many of us because we were raised in families that didn't talk about finances. In fact, there was an Emily Post book that came out only about 25 years ago saying that talking about money in the company of others was one of the most rude and impolite things to do. And that still definitely is cocooned in many families. So how do you talk about money? And it really depends on the age of your kids. Having a really frank conversation with an 18-year-old about your finances and how much you can afford to support them in college is very different than having a conversation with, let's say a six-year-old. But the most important thing is to get your family talking. And with that, there are some great books. One of the books that I most dearly love, written by Ron Lieberman, called The Opposite of Spoiled. And it is a wonderful book that can be used to talk about particularly parents who really can spoil their children. And many of us, I myself am one of them, saying you can be spoiled, but you're not allowed to be a spoiled brat. And there's a big difference between that. So how do you as a parent set parameters, set boundaries for your children when the answer to that question of, can I have that iPhone, and you answering, sorry, we can't afford it, when you know and they know that's actually really not true. So part of it is explaining, in our family, this is what we value. And we value spending our money in these ways and making it very clear. It could be that your family values spending money on experiences, maybe vacations together. And so you get your kids involved with planning those special experiences for your family. It could be that your family really values using that money to help others, so volunteering. So that is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity of getting the family together to say, which organizations do we care about? What organizations do we want to be involved with? And how do we give our money? And how much should we give? And kids will all of a sudden become alight and on fire and understand the importance of money and the good that it can do. And I truly do believe in having kids, even from a pretty young age, start to manage an allowance. And that allowance might be very small. It might be, larger, but you need to make sure that the amount of money that you're giving your child requires them to actually think about how they are spending it. I know, Sharon, you mentioned, had heard about one of the teenagers having $500 walking cash. That probably isn't the best option, to be honest. You want your children to learn how to manage money. And this goes back to everything that Sharon, you just said, Jeff, you just said. Think about all this investing that we're making in our children to do well in school, have good grades, be successful, go to the right college. Well, I can tell you, and I'm sure every person attending here today can think of that child, of a friend, another family member who had the great grades, who graduated and ended up losing it all. And that's because one of the most important educational pieces that all kids need is the piece about finances. And that's the piece that, unfortunately, we're not teaching. So with that, I feel it's really important, again, from a very early age, teaching them how to budget, how to save, how to give money to charity if that is part of your values, and also having them have responsibility. And responsibility is a really important piece so that going forward, they're given, let's say, $5 a week, they spend it all, and the kids, their friends are going out for, sodas or something, they don't have money, guess what? You have to realize the consequences. We also see that of going off to college and having a budget for eating out, for clothing, and month after month blowing through that budget and seeing credit card debt growing. And far too many kids have learned that mom and dad are going to bail them out and that mom and dad will swoop in and pay off that credit card. And here they are now, 40-year-olds, maybe even 50-year-olds, waiting for mom and dad to die so that they get their inheritance to yet be bailed out again. So these are all subliminal messages similar to writing your children's essay for them, for their homework, giving them too much support. And it's the same thing also with finances. You need to let them make their mistakes and ideally have them be smaller mistakes before they get out there in the world and can't actually recover from them.
Right, and I think it's a really interesting point what you're saying, Stacy, about kind of surviving in a way, giving that boundary, which I think that for a lot of us parents, that's a hard thing, right? To survive the aftermath of the no, the aftermath of the you're not going to that party, or I'm not bailing you out of this situation, you're going to lose this credit card altogether because, you're going to now have to pay the minimum balance. I think, one of the things that's really hard for us parents sometimes is to recognize that by not allowing our kids to learn through the mistakes or through the failures here and there, what we're in essence
Hmm.
doing is, you know, allowing them to get by without seeing that this is serious stuff, and the consequences just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And in my work running a company that offers tutoring and school placement counseling and workshops, one of the things that I see often is that the conversation with the parent sometimes about what is it going to take for your child to achieve these goals, or what is it going to, where are we today and where do we want to be, let's say 3 months down the line or 6 months down the line or a year down the line. It's going to take work, and that work is going to involve, often a team process. And sometimes looking at that process is what creates some of the friction, because I think that many of us struggle to do the things we don't enjoy doing, one of which is surviving not sometimes being liked by our own kids. So
Yeah, yeah.
if there's a sense of, well, I could plug in, more of this or more of that. And yes, I understand that we really shouldn't be doing it this way, but if I can get you to pass, and kind of fill this hole right now, next time around, we're going to be able to do it differently. And then the next time around comes, and it's hard to do it differently. And now the stakes are higher. And it's even harder to say, oh, we're just going to let you live with the consequences. But what I say to parents often is, think about your college kid having to come back home, because they just couldn't manage their time, and they weren't handing in their assignments, and they weren't able to pass their finals, and life became one extension to the next extension to the next extension. Let me borrow from Peter to pay Paul, right? And then suddenly, the consequences are really big, like walking out sophomore year before the finals, showing up at home like, I just can't manage any of this, right? So I think every time we avoid that consequence and we push it into the future, it's going to create a budget, like we're kind of creating the deficit for the future. Eventually we are going to have to atone for it. um, and so this idea of money really is just one of the big pieces of grown-up life, right? Like if we can be resilient, even if we make a lot of money and we're very successful and we can afford a lot of things, and we don't want to create an unrealistic context for our kids, like you're going to have one pair of shoes a year because I want you to understand the value of money. Well, that's not really that's not really putting kids in a,
Yeah, that's not going to work.
right? But sort of really figuring out, what, as you said, what is the context? What is the value for us? What is it that we're trying to teach? Do we want to have adults, kids who then can go through the developmental stages that they need to go through and learn through those developmental stages so that they can be competent adults, right? And I see money as truly an area of competency. I grew up in a family that didn't teach me anything about money. I never got sat down. Nobody ever showed me how do you balance a checkbook. How do you do just kind of basic finances. It was kind of a little bit of what you're talking about. I don't know if it was considered rude, or if somehow, people thought, well, magically this is something you learn even though you're going off to a liberal arts college. But I didn't learn it in high school. I didn't learn it in my household. I didn't learn it in college. I majored in psychology. I had to really choose to go learn. And, the little that I know helps me kind of understand what decisions I want to make and what decisions I don't want to make, right? Which is what financial
Mhm.
literacy is about. Literacy in finances is really about gaining the resiliency, the self esteem to be able to sit down with certain choices on hand and say, well, these are my goals. I actually don't want to go in this route, right? I have more of a short term plan or medium term
Yeah.
plan.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
know, I think kids benefit from seeing things that way as well.
Yeah, it's it's really important, and people are talking more about money. So we are kind of shifting the dial. We actually just got a question that came in that I wanted to share, and it was interesting. Do you think it's healthy for parents to openly discuss their own financial situation, the family's financial situation with children? And is there a line that parents should avoid crossing when it comes to money? I think that's a great question. In my situation, my family, we openly talk about our finances. We talk about income. We talk about expenses. We talk about things that we're saving up for, how much we've saved so far for college, and what we need to save as well. But the one thing that we don't do is that you never want to scare your children. So whatever you are sharing, you want to make sure that your children feel safe and protected, that you are there and that you're sharing this information because you want them to learn about money. But at the same time, if you are, struggling with debt, then say, mommy and daddy, we're paying off some debt, and we have a really great plan to do that. And this is what our plan is. And we're really making great strides, and I'm really proud of ourselves. So whatever that situation is, and I guess that crossing the line is that, is just making sure your children feel safe. Because we have had clients come to us where maybe it was a single mom, and that single mom unfortunately treated their child more as a friend than as a child, and shared their fears about their finances of, I'm not sure if we're going to make it, we might be evicted, and the fear and anxiety that would create in any child is really just unspeakable. And I've even had individuals who were not financially destitute, that their parent really shared their financial fears with them. And it was often for them because they had been raised maybe in a household with Holocaust survivors or whatever it was, but they had such fear about money that was really imprinted on their children. And there became great anger in their children when their parents finally passed away and they found out that their parents had millions. So again, you just have to be very careful in what you tell your children, that you are honest and you're upfront, but you also, most importantly, want to make sure that you do it in a way that they feel safe,
Right.
And can I just add to that, part of the college exploration process is trying to figure
yes.
out how much you can afford to pay for college.
What can you afford?
Right. What can you afford, or what you're willing to pay for, right? I mean, a state school may be less money, but sometimes a private school can be with scholarships, but, and then there's debt, right? The students need to take loans out, and explaining what that means to a student is very important, because as we know, there's a huge financial crisis surrounded around student debt because students didn't really understand what they were getting themselves into.
I know, and what's interesting, Jeff, 10 years ago, students were graduating with student loans. Now we're seeing students graduate not only with student loans, but with huge amounts of credit card debt. In fact, often we're seeing credit card debt high enough where it surpasses their first year salary. And so how do you become an independent, functioning, successful adult when you're burdened with that much credit card debt from the beginning?
Right, and I think that that goes back a little bit, ties in a little bit with this idea of, if I pay for this, it's going to be better than if I choose this different route for my child, right? I think a lot of this can come from a place of guilt. I should be giving, or I shouldn't have a conversation about the college budget and what that looks like. And to your point, Stacey, about not scaring children. I think that there is a way to look at possibilities in a joyful manner, as opposed to a manner in which we're constantly comparing and contrasting and saying, well, that person has more, so of course they're going to get more. There is a reality sometimes, right, that can be challenging to accept, which is, you know, does money factor into certain situations and certain privileges for children or for adults and children? Absolutely, it can. But I think that we are fortunate to live in a country where there are ample options to get a very good education. And those options are created by donations and institutions and scholarships and universities and colleges that give opportunities for different reasons. It takes time and it is a real job figuring out what those opportunities are, which is what fascinated me about going into education and creating a company, because I really believe that there are so many opportunities out there that sometimes just sitting with a neutral party to both be able to voice what the ideas are for parents, and for me to be able to kind of show what the picture could look like, and so sometimes a lot of this debt and a lot of the craziness and the anxiety can be created by there's something better out there, and the options we have in front of us aren't good enough. We've got to create different options, right? But it's not looking at what the reality of the situation is to then be able to match it up to the option, whether it be financial, whether it be here's my child and here's what I need to do, and it's the best thing for my child. I don't care about Susie or Johnny because they're living in different lives or tracks. And I think that is a huge challenge in parenting, right? I think the resiliency can come in when there's also that piece of recognition, like, gosh, maybe I do wish my child could go to Harvard. Maybe that was my fantasy and I wish that could happen. But, I have a different child. And so let's take a look at what those options are for my child and then celebrate it. Celebrate their efforts, our effort in paying for that, right? As opposed to constantly looking at things from a deficit lens.
Sharon, actually, a question just came in for you, if you don't mind me sharing that. So the person wrote, what are your thoughts on parent and child relationships that are more like friendships? Is that more or less healthy than a strict or a semi-strict parent?
A lot of parenting has to do with the temperament that our children come with. So, parents who have more than one child will very often talk about how different their children are and how the different children elicit different responses from them. Some children need stricter rules, very clear boundaries, communicated in a very clear way. Other children don't need that because they do their homework on their own. They follow the rules. They're programmed to kind of follow, the guidelines, either spoken or unspoken. So it truly depends on the child that you have. But I also believe that, parents know when something isn't quite right in that parenting relationship. So, for children as they're growing up, they have to, in some form, be able to look to an adult and know that they're not the adult, know that they're not responsible for the household finances, know that they're not responsible, let's say they're 10, but they're not responsible for cooking the family meal. There are certain boundaries that I really think keep us civilized and keep us kind of able to live alongside each other, mentoring each other in an appropriate way. And so I think, the idea of a parent being a friend, certainly there is an element of friendship in parenting, I think. But there's also an element of knowing when to say no. A child needs to be able to look to a parent for as providing the guidelines. They look for that. So, there's certain children, as I mentioned, their temperament is such that they just do things naturally. And for other children, the temperament is more difficult. And when the temperament is more difficult, those are the kids who are the most difficult to parent, most difficult to set boundaries with, but who need it the most, ironically. So it's not a straightforward answer. Should a parent be a friend? I think a parent is going to feel when things have crossed a certain line and when things are out of control. And if that is sometimes the feeling that this particular parent has, then it sounds to me like, there needs to be a bit of a shift in that relationship.
Mhm. Yeah. And I mean, I just had this situation yesterday where my son really did not like me. And, was I being a friend at that point? No, I was definitely being a parent. But other times when he's having a situation at school, I will be a friend of listening. Well, tell me more. What did that feel like? Um, but I will just share again because I think it's the hardest piece that you shared about parenting is knowing that time when kids really don't like you and are really upset with you because you have set those boundaries, that they blow over. That they blow over. And in the period, at least for me, and this is again was just yesterday, felt like it was never going to end and that he was never going to stop his berating and being upset and all of that. And funny enough, 45 minutes later, came over and said, "You know what, Mom, I overreacted and I'm sorry." And and then he said, "I love you." And I'm like, "Okay, wait." And I'm like, "I'm going to go get the recorder so I can record this because I need to remind you." And he's like, "Stop, Mom, stop." And of course he got mad at me again. But it is hard in that moment. It's so hard to hold the line of no, no, no. But Mom,
It is
you know,
hard. Susie and Jeff, I had a talk that I gave a couple of weeks back where, that question of boundaries came up, and the parent was sharing. The talk was about structuring summer routines because I say, summer is really a season. I mean, it's 3 months long, right? So this
yeah.
idea we're off for summer often sets people up for a pretty miserable summer, actually. Because, particularly teens, if they are a little vulnerable to stuff, they need things to do. They need, a reason to get up and to have some structure surrounding those 3 months. And so the parent said, every time I try to talk to my son, he either throws his phone at me or he bangs the door in my face. It becomes this huge thing. And so we just kind of dropped the topic of summer. And I said, all right, well, that behavior, first of all, is great, right? So we need to kind of take a look at what's happening there. Where is this behavior coming from? So that we can have the conversation about summer. And, the response of this parent was, well, I have heard a lot from professionals and I have gone to a lot of different talks and everybody gives great advice, but it doesn't work. And I said, well, actually, what doesn't work in behavior is inconsistency. So if one day you want to be the super friend, right, and say, oh, honey, it's okay that you overspent, or it's okay that, you did X, Y, and Z. And then the next day you want to be the authoritarian saying, absolutely not, no TV, no social media, no whatnot, right? That's what doesn't work. We know in terms of behaviorist theory and behaviorist, practice, we know through our very well documented research that if you keep giving the same response to a situation, the results will eventually be what you want it to be. So in other words, just as you did with your son, you had to draw the boundary and you gave him a very clear message of what it was and you held the fort to it. Right. And so his response initially may not have been great. It may have been, I hate you. I wish you weren't my mom. I mean, they really go for the tough stuff. They go for,
Bless them.
for the jugular, that there's really,
Yeah.
they can be real stinkers and, and they know how to get to us. So I think that that's the important part. If somebody is questioning, should I be my child's friend? It indicates to me a little bit in a way that there have been moments where that, interaction hasn't worked out. And so, kind of getting some clarity around what is it, right, that I want to see in my child or in my adolescent, and am I modeling that, right? So if I'm modeling bad spending habits it's hard to then turn around and say, you
Yeah.
can't blow your budget,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
So, if we're out of control in any particular area of our lives, point of being resilient is to look at it, right? To say, okay, maybe I've made mistakes, or maybe I'm not doing this the way I want to be doing it. So what do I create for myself? Where are the resources? Where is the Stacey Francis that I need to reach out to learn more about financial literacy? Where is the Jeff Dorvac that I need to reach out to talk about, hey, my teen is behaving in these ways, right, towards this college process. At Maya Education Resource Center, we see parents from all walks of life, all kinds of situations. Those who could easily afford the $1,000 an hour for the SAT tutoring, to those who really are scraping by in their own lives, and they're coming to us either paying out of pocket, or they're coming to us through the Department of Education, and we're providing the tutoring for the child. And so I think, the resources honestly do exist. Whenever I hear somebody in an audience saying, well, it just doesn't exist, or this is just not possible. It's kind of like, well, that's already a defeatist and difficult starting
Yeah.
point, right? If that's where we're starting as adults, can you imagine where the kids are?
The message to the kids, right? The message to the kids is picked up.
Right? So it's kind of like, okay, I think, look, we're all human. We all have moments of feeling like, gosh, this is a mountain too high to climb. I'm overwhelmed. But I think to just kind of take a moment, take a breath, look around, see what are the resources around you, to then be able to look at your situation and decide based on your situation, not creating these fantasies for kids or for ourselves. Right? I mean, at $45,000 a year for private school starting in kindergarten, in this city, at $65,000 a year for private education, right? That's a serious investment. And I think that we have to be able to look at it, right? To say, what does that mean for my family? Can I make this kind of investment? And if so, how do I make this kind of investment work for me and my family? If I want the additional tutoring, what's going to work for me and my family? When we're able to look at our situation and look at our resources and make it a match, whether it's the match of the child at a school or a match of ourselves with the situation that we're engaging in, the chances that we're going to be successful in it are just that much higher. They're that much higher. Jeff, any thoughts?
I agree.
Yeah. So I don't know if we have any more questions coming in.
Let me go through. I'm going to just look at the scroll. This is an interesting one. The last question that I have here is, where does charitable work come into play? What's the right age to get your child involved with volunteer work? Do you feel like it helps kids get grounded? I think it would be great for all of us to talk about this. I can talk about it from the financial end, and it might be interesting for you and Sharon and Jeff, if you want to talk about how important is volunteer work to, even for you, Jeff, getting into college. Is that something that they look at? And Sharon, how you see it's good for kids going through high school and even junior high. Getting kids involved with volunteer work from the financial end, I believe that it has to be more than just giving money. It's wonderful to be able to write a check, but that isn't very tangible for kids. So that's part of it, but I also really encourage families to choose again, together, a charity. Maybe it's Habitat for Humanity. So not only do you give a check, but you also go and walk the dogs, or you help them with cleaning out cages once a month. Somehow you get really involved. It could be the Bronx Zoo, because that's your favorite zoo that your family is part of, and you then go to their fundraiser, you volunteer, you get involved with them. So I believe that volunteering and having that charitable piece, you really can't start too soon. Again, it's most important, though, to get everybody's buy-in. And you may even have a couple different organizations. It could be that, my daughter loves wolves. And so She wants us, we give money to wonderful rehabilitation places for wolves. Whereas for me, I donate to Savvy Ladies, which is a nonprofit that we started as a family 15 years ago to teach women about money. My son is very different. He's really into more so birds and rehabilitating birds. So everyone's different, and getting everybody involved and then making that decision of what are we going to do this year is really powerful. But I'd love to hear from you, Jeff. How important is that work when it comes to a college, for example? Does that really matter? Should we be doing more of that also just from the being well-rounded?
It does. The one caveat that I will say, it's not so much about just counting the hours, but actually doing something that's meaningful. And you don't have to go to Uganda to, dig a well. You can do things right in your backyard, which, the truth of it is, I think colleges are more interested in seeing that, you went down to the local soup kitchen, or you went down to the local elementary school. You did something that you could see that you got engaged in. I worked with a really bright young woman 2 years ago, wound up getting into a lot of wonderful schools, but she got, just as an example, she got involved with a beauty pageant that was for disabled women. And, she just did it on a whim, a volunteer kind of thing that, she really didn't know what to expect, but she absolutely fell in love with it. She got really involved. She stayed with it for many years. And she wound up writing her essay about that experience, and it was really something you could see that was really important, really meaningful, and guided her in a direction where she wanted to study, education and psychology. Those are the things I think are important. And the other thing that I will say, adding to financial literacy, I cannot say enough and the importance of a student having a job before they go to college. I do not know what happened to the summer job, but they're few with many of the students that I work with, and I think that's really unfortunate. As I said before, I read applications at UC Berkeley. We can see when a kid just stacks, activities, extracurriculars to make themselves look good. But we also like to see kids that are doing things that are meaningful, but then we also like to see kids that have responsibility or leadership, and often that comes through in a job. So not just volunteering, but an actual job, making minimum wage or whatever it is. I'm not talking about at your dad's law firm or your cousin's, real estate firm. I'm not talking about a gratuitous job. I'm talking about working at Best Buy, landscaping, summer camp, lifeguarding, things like that. I think those are important experiences.
Yeah. And, the other piece to the volunteer opportunities is to think about the world beyond ourselves, right? To start teaching children that it's not just about the child or not just about the household, that there is a world that we can connect with that is beyond our immediate everyday experiences in life. And I think that we know through very well documented research that, when kids can connect to something that's bigger and build empathy for other things, that this can be of huge benefit, not just for humanity, but also for the well-being of the child, to see that, gosh, I made an effort and I helped somebody, and that help translated into something tangible. That's an opportunity to connect. And I think, that goes back to this idea of fit, in my opinion, when we are able to really connect with our kids and who they are, then we place them in environments where they can make connections, right? And when they make connections, the chances that they're going to go after the things that they enjoy and practice those things and master those things are that much higher, because we're giving them opportunities to develop as a well-rounded individual. And I think, as we think through what are the goals for raising our kids and, putting them in a college setting, I would certainly think that putting them in a college setting where they experience themselves as effective, as competent, is a big part of how we feel our job as parents have panned out. You know, when we see our kids be competent, it's going to give us a sense of, you know, we did some things here that really helped them to reach that competency. So, you know, the idea of seeing a world that's just a little bigger, you know, that's not just about here are my grades, here's me, but there's something beyond me. It's hugely important to mental health, well-being of the child, of the family.
That's great. Well, we have gone through all of our questions, and we have gone through and answered so many different things. And again, Sharon, I just can't thank you enough for coming up with the idea of this wonderful panel. And this will be recorded so we can send this out to all those listeners that are not here live today. And we'll also make sure to include our contact information as well so that everyone has that.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate being with colleagues who are like-minded, and you know, we all wish our listeners a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.